Hello, my name is Oluwatoyin Salau. I've been doing videos talking about American presidents, and today what I want to do is a follow up to what um, what Nigerians owe Black Americans. In one of the videos, I had stated that that it's Black Americans who've been doing the activism, who've been engaged in activism, who've marched, for civil rights, for equality, and that Nigerians, have just recently come, well, since the 70s and the 80s, and they, up to up to date, and they simply are getting the benefits of legislation that was, passed as a result of all the marching and activism that Black Americans, did in the past. And I thought, that's not correct. The reason why I particularly recalled, thought about it, that uh, it's not that's not entirely true. Of course, is because of news I came across today. I saw that President Trump had recently revoked the visas of 100,000, um, you know, foreigners here in America for various reasons, and in particular, 8,000 student visas. And I I recalled, I recalled my niece. I've talked about how I was assaulted by police, right? Wrongfully assaulted by police in my home without an arrest warrant. I wasn't committing any crime based on a false accusation by a man with dementia, but most likely with dementia, or I mean, definitely a lunatic. That's Jide Warire, because he's a perjurer. So I was shot in my head. I've talked about it. The lines, the scarring that it's left me. Um, Prior to that incident on May 16, 2023, I had been planning on sponsoring my niece, who was 19 years old at the time, to come and pursue graduate studies, and I was going to fund her, finance her, and support her. Um, and so the revocation of visas, news that I read today, it made me wonder that, okay, would her visa have been arbitrarily revoked? Would she, have had to suffer the tense moments right now, the crisis with the ICE, with ICE raids, students, there have been stories of students uh, who had valid visas and were wrongfully deported, right? Wrongfully deported back home. They were handcuffed, arrested, detained, and sent back home, even though they had valid student visas. And so people have been going through all sorts of things now. And that made me remember somebody a young woman who died during the George Floyd protests. She was born here in America, and may her soul continue to rest in peace. That's Oluwatoyin Salau. She was a Nigerian American born in Tallahassee, Florida. She's Yoruba like me, Oluwatoyin Salau. And she was 19 at the time she was raped and murdered. She was enrolled in a community college, was a Tallahassee Community College, and she'd been out, doing participating in the protests, nonviolent protests in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and other uh, uh, police, wrongful police killings of black men. I think there was a black man, a trans man who'd recently been killed in Tallahassee, Florida, and he'd been shot to death by Tallahassee police. And so I think she was involved in some of the nonviolent protests. So she participated in the activism. So there were Nigerians who were participating in the wake of the George Floyd killings, and there was legislation that was passed after the killing of George Floyd. So um, and the story of Oluwatoyin Salau, it was so sad because I remember I was following what was going on then, and when George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight by road cops, right, um, in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is always in the news. Um, I remember how how it touched me, it moved me, and I was upset that Oluwatoyin, she was 19, and the reason she she was preyed on, the predator, the monster. I think his name is some Aaron Glee, right? Aaron Glee Jr. He preyed on her and pretended he was giving her help. After she'd participated in the protests, and she was moving her belongings right from a church, and she had tweeted, that she was escaping unjust living conditions, and at the time, I had wondered, what did she mean by unjust living conditions? Was it her landlord, that maybe she had a landlord that was abusing her, and I was also concerned that she was only 19 years old, and somehow she was manipulated and just carted away by this stranger, this stranger that nobody knew. It was a black American guy, right? And he ended up raping and killing her. Apparently, when he had first sexually assaulted her, she tweeted it on June 6, 2020, right? But nobody responded. And I wondered, why didn't she go to the police, or why didn't somebody go to the police on her behalf? Because she wasn't killed immediately, right? It took some days. They said that at least she was still seen alive on June the 10th. So there was 4 days. 4 days passed. But then I thought about it because maybe she didn't trust the police, right? She didn't trust Tallahassee police because they just killed the black man, right? The black trans man, and so maybe she had a fear of the police, and this is what happens in the black communities, right? It reminds me of the killing that happened. Was it in 2024? Sonia Massey. She had feared. She had noticed that there seemed to be a prowler, around her apartment, and she called 911 for help. Just to feel secure. And the cops came and ended up killing her. Right, an unarmed black woman seeking help. They came and they killed her in her apartment. They first dehumanized her, abused her, and then they killed her. They murdered her in cold blood. And these are the travels that black people experience, with cops, right? So there's another video that I was planning on doing that I'm going to do, because I realized, I've gotten into the period of Jim Crow, in honor of Black History Month, and I talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, and so I need to emphasize the KKK, and what they were doing, how they intimidated black people. So I'm going to continue do another video regarding that, but I just wanted to make that correction that since the time Nigerian Americans have come, we've tried to participate in advancing, civil rights for everybody, equal rights, the way Black Americans have done traditionally, and we've used. Let me not say me because I haven't been involved in any protests. But Nigerian Americans who've participated, they've employed peaceful means, right? Peaceful means. Now that I've been doing these videos because of my the wrongful prosecution that I'm suffering, the malicious prosecution I'm suffering, in order to prevent a lawsuit against the police brutality that I suffered in my home when I wasn't committing any crime. Right, I'm a law-abiding American citizen. I was working in the federal government when I was shot in my home. I was tasered and dehumanized, and racial slur was used on me by rogue cops, right? And they're the ones who actually engineered the whole swatting. What I suffered was a swatting, right? When somebody makes a false police report that there's a crisis going on at the victim's residence, so that in order to generate an armed police presence. So it was the police who engineered the swatting in the first place, right? It was rogue cops, they engineered it. So of course, with Jide Warrior, they did it together, because I'd called the police on May 14, 2023, when Jide Warrior and my neighbor that I'd never spoken to, doesn't speak a word of English, right? And they'd initially come, and then one other guy, three of them, had assaulted me, attempted to kidnap me, right? Because I told Jide where I don't want him to come to my home. It's my home. I have a right to draw boundaries. And my friend, who, immediately, because I called her, and she said, "Look, they've assaulted you. Call the police, right?" And so when I called the police, and the police showed up, fortunately, my friend spoke with one of the cops for almost 10 minutes. But the police then went to falsify their incident reports. They falsified their incident report and then planned a swatting for GDAY to go to a court, perjure an emergency evaluation petition, which they now used to come and raid me 2 days after, right? And they've been passing fraudulent documents in the courts, fraud on the court. And there's a corrupt judge, Judge James Bonifant, that's in on it, a corrupt state attorney's office. Maybe GDAY is friends with them, I don't know, because or his daughter and his son, who are attorneys in Maryland, and they've all lived in the Montgomery County for over 40 years. So maybe they know they know the criminal law enforcement that's involved in this charade, in these false malicious prosecution that I've been suffering. But in any event, let me not personalize this. And well, it does get personal because I'm a black person, and seeing that the injustices against Black Americans, the violations of the civil rights of Black Americans that I had read of in history, that I had studied in law school, that there were things that happened in the past. The fact that they're still happening today, the fact that I'm experiencing them. I remember I was still blown away when I used to, because I'd written some pieces criticizing police, and maybe that's one of the reason they targeted me. Maybe somebody came across my writings criticizing police brutality and a wrongful conviction of black men by rogue cops. You know, when I had read that there were black people who were convicted wrongfully of crimes they never committed and had spent over 20 years, decades in prison for something they had never done. It was outrageous. I found it outrageous and I wrote about it. So the fact that I'm experiencing a wrongful prosecution, that the person who assaulted me now lied, and there's evidence. The state attorney knows. The public defender said, like, these guys have no evidence of what they're claiming. They're the ones who actually assaulted me. That's what the evidence shows. In my home, they had no arrest warrants, and they've filed these false charges to defame me, just to use it as blackmail and to extort me for 3 years in order to obstruct justice. And it's going on. It's outrageous. Like, America is not what I thought it was. I'm an American citizen now. But what I read today, it made me, reminisce. I recalled, the good old days, of when I was once an international student, and I compared and I thought, my niece would not have been able to enjoy what I enjoyed in the past. Because I remember I went to a predominantly white school in the South, right? That was once considered very racist. And those white people there were good to me. I remember I worked for a guy, and my boss, he had been uh, he owned about 70 acres of land, and he was a small business owner. He owned, a variety of businesses, and he'd hired me as his bookkeeper, and I was his assistant. He had me running all sorts of stuff in his office while I was a student. I was a full-time student doing my MBA, and I'd gone originally, as an intern, and it was one of my professors who helped me get the job, right? And this guy, he had me come and stay. One day because I was getting a new place, a new apartment. I was moving off campus or something, and I got a place, and he asked me. He said, "Look, he's got a place in his in his at his home. He owned 70 acres of property. It was a huge land. This guy was actually a prosperous guy. He came from a prosperous family, one of the most important families in Troy, that particular place. So I was kind of lucky that I came in contact with him. So he asked me to go and look at this. He said he had a mobile home right? He asked me to go and see if I could live there. That it was all done up, had it was self-contained, had everything. He said, look, save your money, instead of you wasting money on whatever. That if you're fine with it, you can stay there. That's fine. So I went, looked at it, I was fine, and I was staying there. Now, at some point when I was moving back on campus, my friends, I had my friends come and help me move, right, and get my things so I could move back on campus. And so my friends were driving me because I'd sold my car at that time. So my friends were helping me move. So, my friends were driving me. It was Troy, Alabama. It's country, and lots of lands. Like what you see in movies. Vast lands. Like just miles of road without houses. Like houses are like several miles apart, and it was like in the middle of nowhere, and we were driving, and you'd be speeding and driving, and they're just driving through, and they couldn't see anybody. Like it was in the middle of nowhere, and my friends were scared. These were guys, and there were about four of us because they were helping me move, and everyone was scared. They're like, "Where are you taking us to?" Can you imagine? It was weird. And when they got there, and they were like, "Man, you're a brave guy. How could you sleep in this place?" They would never be able to sleep because when we got there, it was in the middle of nowhere, right? It was in the middle of nowhere. If something happened to me, if they did, there would be nobody to help me. It was just you understand. There will be nobody to help. And at that time, I didn't even have a phone. This was like 2000. I didn't have like over 25, 26 years ago, right? 25 years ago or so, 20, yeah, 20, 24 years ago. I didn't even have a phone. I didn't have a cell phone. But nobody, and these were white people. Nobody there harmed me, right? And the situation has changed. The situation has changed. We're hearing every time I see the news now. Yesterday, I was a few days ago. I was reading the news, and news of international students dying, being killed. They don't know how they died mysteriously. And today I'm seeing all these attacks. The government are, revoking the visas of 8,000 students, claiming that they had drug possession or they committed some kind of crime or whatever. International students don't come to America to commit crime, right? They don't come to America to commit crime. And I'm wondering, did these people get their due process? Because I'm an American citizen now, right? And it's 3 years. I was in my home. Police had no arrest warrant. They filed false charges against me. All fabrications, just fabricated evidence, created false witnesses. And we haven't had a trial because I want them to take this stuff to trial because I've reported everybody, the judge, the prosecutor, reported them, the cops, right? The FBI is watching, the Department of Justice. The bad thing is that they refer it back to the jurisdiction where it happened, the state jurisdiction, for their bodies to investigate. And, I don't know, it's just bizarre. If I'm not having due process, I'm an American citizen. I'm wondering these people that they're claiming that, committed crimes, right? And the government has revoked their citizenship and they've been locked up. Did they get due process? Because you're innocent until proven guilty. America, the state of Maryland at least, they make it seem like, well, charging somebody with a crime means they're guilty. It means they've been convicted of a crime. No, no, no. You're innocent until proven guilty. We know there's police misconduct. We know there's prosecutorial misconduct. So I'm concerned about what's going on now, and particularly young people. And I'm glad I remembered the story of Oluwatoyin Salau, right? She was a young lady. She was 19. She was in college. There was no reason for her to have been killed. And it's particularly, disheartening when Black people are preyed on by members of their own community. She was killed by a Black man. She went to protest the wrongful killings of black men. It was after in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and there was another Black man in Tallahassee, Florida, that had been murdered again by the police, right? And so this was And I guess she felt compassion, right? And she wanted to get involved. And because that's how many of us knew American citizens of African descent, and in my case, in her case, we're Nigerians. She was born in America, but sometimes Black Americans want to guilt trip us and say, well, we're taking their spots, and we're that they're the ones who are who are the activists. They're the ones who march, or it's their ancestors who did the marching. It's their ancestors who did the picking of the cotton. It's their ancestors that did stuff, and so we haven't done anything, and we're just benefiting and taking the spot of Black Americans. So this is Toyin Salau. She comes out. She was a student. She didn't need to be, right. It's good to be an activist for civil rights. That's a good thing, but she was 19 years old, right? 19 years old in Nigeria, a woman, not just even a woman, your parents are not going to let you out of anywhere. You're going to be indoors. You're going to be at home, right? Me, as a guy, I never left my parents until I came. The first time I was away from my family, my parents, was when I came to America, right? I'm telling you, that's just how it is in Nigeria. Unless I don't know what sort of home, they don't let you out. They don't because if you come from a home, um, our families value us. It's not like in America at 18, you could just get up and go away and nobody cares, right? No, we don't do that in Nigeria where I come from, at least in my Yoruba culture. We don't. And I know in many other cultures as well, you just don't get up, right? If you don't leave your family's home until you probably get married, right? You're going to stay with your parents, be with them, right? When you get married, okay, they know it's time to go, but you're gonna be with your parents. You're gonna stay with them, right? I never left my parents, even when I went to university in Nigeria. My father made me stay with my uncle, right? I stayed with my uncle. It's funny that my uncle that I stayed with, his oldest brother was uh, was the principal to several of Nigeria's uh, former heads of state, military dictators, including General Ibrahim Babangida, who was very good to him, made him a millionaire, right? And I think Abacha as well, General Abacha, but he was principal to several of them, And so his younger brother was a disciplinarian. He had a very huge impact on me. So when I was in university, I had to stay with him, and I'm not in wasn't in university. Of course, I was staying with my parents back in Lagos because I went to school in another up north, right? So it's unfortunate that this 19-year-old. I've often wondered where were her parents because they've never said anything in all the reports. Because I followed the piece, the story, uh, you know, ardently at that time. I wanted to know what was going on in her life. I wanted to understand how she got in that situation and how her parents were doing, but there was no mention of her family. It said that she was born in Tallahassee, Florida, and she was just 19 years old, right? And it's so sad that many times Black people, especially Black women, are preyed on by members of the Black community. When I before that swatting, in fact, the two people that were involved, all the people that were involved in my swatting, apart from the police, were all Black people, and the place I was living in was predominantly white. Right, I was living in Silver Spring, Maryland, the area by Rockville, predominantly white environment, but the people who had swat because I'd been swatted. There was a false 911 call by a female predator. I just didn't want to talk to. Right, I'm somebody. I mind my business. I'd lived there for 2 years, and she had she wanted to talk to me. I refused to talk to her. She made a false 911 call. The police came. The police knocked on my door. Fortunately, it was a Black man who came. A black man asked me to come to the police station and file a restraining order against her. I didn't want to because I didn't want my name to be in the police records or anything. I didn't want to be, I'd never done that. So I wasn't interested, especially since I had a federal government job. I was working in the Department of Defense. So I let it go. I didn't know I'd be swatted again 6 months after that. And it's black people, black people preying on black people. It's a terrible situation. The way this guy, and it wasn't just a matter of this black American guy, Aaron Glee. It wasn't like he killed her because she was a Nigerian. Her name Oluwatoyin. Of course, she was born here, so she spoke with an American accent, most likely. It wasn't because of her name, because the monster had actually raped. Well, he didn't rape. I don't know if he raped, but he'd killed another woman, a black American woman, around the same time because it was two bodies they found. She was a 75-year-old woman. Her name's Victoria Sims. May her soul rest in peace as well. Continue to rest in peace. So he killed two black women. It's a black man preying on, on vulnerable people, vulnerable. Well, uh, not to call not it would sort of be sexist to call people vulnerable just because of their female. Um, but in this particular instance, they were vulnerable because the 75-year-old was obviously a senior citizen, and the fact that nobody had sought her out all this while, she'd been dead for a while. And then in the case of the 19-year-old Oluwatoyin, her living conditions, she was virtually sort of homeless, at the time because, she had unstable living conditions at that time. And it is so sad. Um, so for all those Nigerian Americans, so for all those Nigerians living in Nigeria that are trying to come to America for their education and trying to jackpot, look, America is not what it used to be. Back then, 20 years ago, I could live in the middle of nowhere, in a place that was formerly like clan land with white people, and no harm came to me, right? Things are different now. You can be with black people, your own black people will kill you. They'll prey on you. The clan is still there, the KKK, because the cops who came to attack me, they are members of the KKK, because that's the monster Jeffrey Ray who shot me used a racial epithet and called me an animal, right? Even though he knew that I was somebody who wasn't committing a crime, that it was a fault, they came on a false call, but they continued with their fabrications, right? So I want to know, the government has still failed to investigate why the police really came to my house, what was really happening. Were they obstructing justice in a federal government investigations for fraud, waste, and mismanagement that I had reported? Was that what was really going on? Because the GDY, the perjurer, he's recanted, he's changed what he said happened, right? And every time they suppress, the charges they filed against him, they put it aside, they suppress it. The state attorney does that because it was he must have colluded with government actors. They probably suborned him to commit perjury, as he claims, right? But in any event, back to the Toyin Salau case. Um, yeah, there've been some Nigerians who got involved in activism, and many do it with their work. There's a comedian that I like, Godfrey. I like to watch Godfrey, and sometimes I get concerned for him because the videos. He's very funny. He's extremely funny. That's Godfrey. He goes by Godfrey. He's extremely funny, but he gets very political, and he's confront his style of comedy. He started some kind of skit that in which he's confrontational, attacking white supremacists outright and mocking them. And I hope he's never targeted, right? I hope he's never targeted. I hope they don't, knock on wood. I hope he's good, because there are these weirdos all over the place right now in America. There are these weirdos, Klansmen. They're all over the place. The Klansmen, they're no longer wearing white sheets and hoods over their faces, right? they're in uniform. They've always been in uniform, but they hid it before. Now they're open about it, right? They're cops, they're judges, they're state attorneys, right? They're open about it. They're in ICE. They are open about it, and they can kill people, and then they will they will fabricate evidence, right? They'll make up the facts. They'll alter facts, right? They create their alternative facts, stuff that never happened, create false witnesses. So it makes black people very, very vulnerable in America right now. So I just wanted I did this just to, uh, in commemoration of the late Oluwatoyin Salau, who was an activist supporting, the advancement of civil rights for all and for Black Americans for all, especially in the wake of the killings, the wrongful police killings of black men, unarmed black men, and the murder of George Floyd. So yeah, but keep safe, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.